"Please, I beg you, untie me," she pleaded. The rancher froze, then broke tradition. The wind whispered gently through the tall grass, carrying the faint scent of hay and earth. For the rancher, it was the perfect time to walk around, checking on the livestock and making sure everything was in order. It was a routine he had followed for decades, a rhythm that gave him comfort and control in a world that often felt unpredictable. He had built his life on this land, one careful decision at a time. The ranch was more than just a job, it was a legacy, a living proof of years of hard work, determination, and unwavering discipline. To him, rules and tradition were everything. They provided safety, structure, and a sense of stability. Outsiders rarely came near this land, and when they did, it was a rare event that required careful consideration. Strangers could bring danger or trouble, and he had always trusted his instincts to keep both himself and his property safe. That evening, as he walked near the barn, he heard something unusual, a soft but urgent knock at the door. His first thought was surprise. Visitors were rare, especially at this hour. He paused, listening carefully, but the knock came again, louder and more desperate this time. He frowned, a knot forming in his stomach. Something was wrong. Cautiously, he approached the door and looked through the small window. Standing there in the fading light was a young woman. She was disheveled, her clothes torn and dirty, and her face showed signs of exhaustion and fear. She looked as if she had been running for a long time. Her eyes met his, wide and pleading, and something inside him shifted, though he wasn't sure why. The rancher opened the door slowly, keeping his hands visible, a silent signal that he meant no harm. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The woman's voice trembled as she spoke. "Please, I beg you, untie me," she said, the words spilling out in a rush. She took a step forward, her hands trembling. "I don't have anyone else. I need help. I don't know where else to go." For a moment, the rancher froze. Her request didn't make sense at first. "Untie you," he repeated, confused. His mind raced. He had lived by the rules all his life, and the rules had always warned him to be cautious, especially with strangers. Yet, as he looked at her, he saw something undeniable. Fear, desperation, and a trust placed entirely in him, a man she had only just met. He glanced around, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The ranch was secluded, surrounded by hills and fields. No one else could see them here. No one would know if something went wrong. He thought about tradition, about the unspoken rules he had followed for decades. Never take risks with strangers, always maintain distance, and always protect yourself first. But he also thought about the expression on her face, the way her lips quivered, the desperation in her eyes. After a long pause, he nodded slowly. "All right," he said quietly, "come inside." Relief flooded her face and she hurried past him, glancing back once to offer a grateful smile. The rancher stepped aside, holding the door open, and watched as she moved toward the safety of the barn. He felt a strange mixture of tension and curiosity. What had happened to her? Why was she here, alone and afraid? Once inside, he guided her to a small, quiet corner near the haystacks. The barn smelled of hay, leather, and the faint trace of horses. It was warm and safe, a stark contrast to the cold, dark world outside. She sank to the ground, her knees drawn to her chest, and let out a shaky breath. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know where else to go." The rancher crouched down beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "You're safe here," he said. "Tell me what happened." She hesitated, her hands trembling as she tried to steady her breathing. Someone tried to hurt me," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I escaped, but I didn't know where to go. I couldn't stay there. I had nowhere else." The rancher listened carefully, every detail sharpening his concern. He had seen fear before, of course, but there was something raw and urgent in her story. She wasn't exaggerating. She wasn't seeking trouble or attention. She just needed help. He remembered his own life, the countless hours he had spent alone on this land, following routine and tradition. He had always believed in doing things a certain way, in trusting his instincts, and never stepping outside the boundaries he had set for himself. And yet, in that moment, he realized that rules and tradition were not as important as doing the right thing. He reached for a blanket and draped it over her shoulders. "You'll be okay," he said, his voice steady. "We'll figure this out together." The woman looked at him, a mixture of relief and lingering fear in her eyes. I didn't expect anyone to help me," she admitted. Most people would have just turned away." The rancher shook his head. "Not everyone," he said simply. "Sometimes you have to trust people, even when it goes against everything you've been taught." For a long while they sat in silence. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, and the last rays of the sun disappeared behind the hills. Inside, the barn was quiet, the only sound the soft breathing of the woman as she began to calm down. The rancher felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction in making the choice to help, even though it was outside his usual way of life. As the evening grew darker, he began to make plans. He would ensure her safety, check the surroundings for any signs of danger, and contact a few trusted neighbors who could assist if necessary. He knew this decision would surprise them, perhaps even draw criticism. But he also knew it was the right thing to do. Compassion, he realized, was worth more than tradition. The woman, sensing his resolve, began to open up more. She spoke softly about how she had ended up in danger, about the person who had threatened her, and about the fear that had driven her across the hills to his ranch. Every word painted a clearer picture of her ordeal, and the rancher felt both empathy and determination grow stronger with each detail. Hours passed, and the night settled in around the ranch. The stars began to appear in the clear sky, and the cool night air drifted through the open doors of the barn. The woman finally leaned back against the hay, exhausted but safe, and the rancher stood nearby, keeping watch. He thought about the strange turn of events, how a quiet evening on his ranch had transformed into a night of responsibility and care. He realized that this encounter was more than just an interruption in his routine. It was a test, a challenge to the very foundation of his beliefs and traditions. And though he did not yet know the full extent of what lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain: he would not abandon this woman. That night, as he checked the doors and ensured that the barn was secure, the rancher felt a quiet shift within himself. For the first time in a long while, he questioned some of the rigid rules he had lived by. Tradition had its place, but humanity, compassion, and courage had their own weight. And in this moment, he chose to let those values guide him. Outside, the wind whispered through the fields once more, carrying with it the promise of a new day. Inside, a young woman, tired but safe, drifted into a tentative sleep, comforted by the presence of someone who had chosen to see her as a person, not a stranger. And the rancher, standing watch in the shadows, felt a quiet, unspoken understanding. Sometimes, doing the right thing required breaking the rules, and sometimes it required a bravery that came from the heart rather than from tradition. The night outside the ranch grew darker and colder, but inside the barn, the atmosphere was tense with unspoken questions. The woman, though finally safe for the moment, could not stop trembling. Her mind kept replaying the events that had led her here, how she had been cornered, tied up, and forced to escape. Even now, the memory made her shiver. She wrapped the blanket tightly around her shoulders, trying to hold onto any warmth she could find. The rancher, standing a few feet away, watched her carefully. He had lived his life relying on instinct, experience, and caution, but this situation was different. He had no clear guide, no established rules to follow. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. One wrong decision could put them both in danger. Yet, as he studied her face, pale under the dim light, he knew that hesitation could be just as dangerous. "You need to tell me exactly what happened," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. "I can't help if I don't know what I'm dealing with." The woman looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was fear, yes, but also a flicker of trust. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. I was staying with someone I thought I could trust," she began, her words cautious. I never imagined I'd be in danger. One moment everything seemed normal, and the next I was tied up, and I had no choice but to run. I don't even know if they're still looking for me, but I can't go back. I don't know where else to turn." The rancher listened intently, his mind piecing together the fragments of her story. He knew that fear could make people vulnerable, and he also knew that danger often came quietly without warning. He needed to act carefully, yet decisively. His eyes scanned the barn, taking note of every possible hiding place, every entrance, every window. The hills around the ranch were open, but shadows could hide someone waiting. He needed to think ahead. "You're safe here for now," he said after a pause, trying to keep his tone reassuring. "I'll make sure of that, but we need to be cautious. If anyone is looking for you, we have to know what to do." The woman nodded, clutching the blanket tighter. I don't know what they'll do if they find me," she admitted. "I just know I can't face it alone. I ran as far as I could, but I didn't know where to go." The rancher crouched slightly to be closer to her level, his eyes steady and calm. "You're not alone anymore. We'll handle this together, but I need you to trust me completely. I'm going to do everything I can to keep you safe, but I need your honesty." She hesitated, then nodded again, tears welling in her eyes. "I'll tell you everything," she whispered. I just want to be safe." For the next hour, she spoke in fragmented sentences, slowly reconstructing the story of her ordeal. The rancher listened without interruption, absorbing every detail. He asked questions when necessary, careful not to push her too far, too fast. With each revelation, he felt the gravity of the situation deepen. This was more than just a scared traveler needing shelter. This was someone who had narrowly escaped harm, and the threat was likely still present. Outside, the wind rustled through the grass, and the occasional hoot of an owl broke the silence. Inside, the barn felt like a small, fragile world, suspended between safety and danger. The rancher moved quietly, checking the doors, the windows, and the perimeter. He had lived on this land long enough to know every inch of it, but tonight, even familiar surroundings felt unpredictable. After a while, he decided it was time to take practical steps. "We need a plan," he said, his voice steady. "If anyone comes looking, we have to be ready." "Do you know anyone who might be trying to find you? Any details about who they are or what they want?" The woman shook her head, frustration and fear mingling in her expression. "I don't know much," she admitted. "I didn't see their face clearly, and I didn't have time to think. I just ran. All I know is that I have to stay away from them." The rancher nodded, understanding the limits of what she could provide. "That's okay. We'll work with what we have. For now, the most important thing is to stay hidden and stay calm. I'll make sure no one gets close without me knowing." He moved toward a small stack of supplies in the corner of the barn. He grabbed a lantern, some rope, and a few other tools he thought might be useful. "We might need to secure this area a bit more," he said. "It's not about locking someone out. It's about making sure you have a safe place to stay if anyone comes near." As he worked, the woman watched him, curiosity mixed with a growing sense of hope. There was something solid and reassuring about the way he moved, the way he thought ahead. In a world that had felt unpredictable and frightening, he was a constant, a protector. For the first time since her escape, she felt a small spark of safety. Hours passed and the darkness deepened. The woman tried to rest, but sleep was elusive. Every sound outside made her heart race. The rancher, aware of her unease, stayed nearby, moving quietly, checking the barn and keeping watch. "It's okay," he said whenever she flinched. "Nothing's going to happen while I'm here." Eventually, she managed to relax a little, leaning against the hay and closing her eyes. The rancher remained alert, his mind never resting. He thought about the situation from every angle. What might happen if the person who hurt her came looking, how to protect her, and how to handle the authorities if needed. Every decision mattered, and every choice could have consequences. By midnight, the woman began to trust him more, opening up slightly about her life before the incident. She spoke of her family, her work, and the simple joys she had once taken for granted. The rancher listened, not just to her words but to the emotions behind them, the fear, the sadness, and the resilience that had carried her this far. "You're stronger than you think," he said gently. "The fact that you made it here shows that, and now you're not alone." She gave a small, grateful smile, the first one that felt real since she arrived. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know what I would have done if I didn't find you." The rancher simply nodded. "You don't have to think about that. Right now, focus on staying safe. We'll handle the rest together." The night moved slowly, each hour marked by careful movements, quiet conversations, and the occasional check of the surroundings. The woman began to feel a small sense of normalcy returning, though the fear never completely left. The rancher, too, found himself reflecting on the unusual circumstances. He had always lived by tradition, by rules, and by careful caution. But tonight, he realized that sometimes, doing the right thing required stepping outside of those boundaries. As the first hints of dawn began to appear on the horizon, the rancher knew that the day ahead would bring new challenges. The woman was safe for the moment, but they could not ignore the possibility of further danger. Together, they would have to plan, prepare, and face whatever came next. Yet in that quiet barn, in the first light of morning, there was a sense of hope. The woman had found someone willing to protect her, and the rancher had discovered that courage sometimes meant breaking from tradition to do what was right. It was the beginning of a journey neither of them had expected, one that would test their resilience, their trust, and their willingness to confront fear head-on. And though the danger was not yet over, and though the challenges ahead were uncertain, they both knew one thing clearly: neither of them would face it alone. The sun rose slowly over the rolling hills, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. The ranch, usually quiet and still in the early hours, now felt alive with tension. The rancher moved carefully through the barn, checking the doors and windows one more time. He had stayed up most of the night, watching over the woman, making sure she felt safe. Now, as daylight spread across the fields, he knew it was time to take action. The night had offered temporary safety, but he couldn't ignore the fact that danger might still be close. The woman sat on a bale of hay, wrapped in a blanket, trying to catch a few moments of rest. Her eyes were red from tears, but there was a small spark of determination shining through. She knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. The person who had chased her might still be nearby, and she had to be prepared for whatever came next. "You need to eat something," the rancher said, placing a simple breakfast in front of her, a piece of bread, some fruit, and a cup of water. "You're weak, and you need your strength if anything happens today." She looked up at him, a mixture of gratitude and unease in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. I don't know what I would have done without you." The rancher nodded, brushing off the praise. "You made it here, that's your strength. I just provided a safe place for now. The rest we'll handle together." After she had eaten a little, they began talking seriously about what needed to happen next. The woman recounted everything she knew about the person who had tried to harm her. It wasn't much, just vague descriptions, footprints, and a sense of menace, but it was enough to start planning. The rancher listened carefully, taking notes in his mind and thinking through every possible scenario. "We have to be cautious," he said finally. "You're not safe yet, and we don't know if they'll come looking again. We need to think about the worst-case scenario and be ready." The woman nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't want to go back to where I was. I can't. But I also don't want to put you in danger." "You're not putting me in danger," he replied firmly. "I've spent my life on this land. I know how to protect people and myself. That's what I'll do." He stood and began moving through the barn, gathering supplies and organizing a small area that could serve as a safe space. Rope, tools, and other materials were set aside, not to trap or scare anyone, but to create a temporary barrier if needed. He also made a mental map of the property, thinking about how to use the terrain, the hills, and the fences to their advantage. The woman watched him, admiring his calmness and quick thinking. For someone who had faced danger alone, it was almost comforting to see someone else take control, someone who knew exactly what to do. She began to feel a tiny bit of hope, a feeling she hadn't felt since the chaos began. By mid-morning, the rancher decided they couldn't simply wait. They needed to take steps to secure the woman's safety beyond the barn. He suggested they move to a small cabin on the property, one that was more isolated and easier to defend if necessary. As they walked toward the cabin, he explained his reasoning. It's safer there, fewer windows, fewer entrances, and it's easier to see anyone approaching. We'll be ready for whatever happens. The woman nodded silently, following closely. Every step she took was cautious, as if expecting danger to appear at any moment. But with each step, she also felt a growing sense of trust in the rancher. He wasn't just offering safety. He was offering stability and calm in a world that had been chaotic and frightening. When they reached the cabin, the rancher immediately began reinforcing it. He checked the doors and windows, moved furniture to create secure spaces, and made sure there was an easy escape route if needed. He also made small adjustments to make the cabin feel more welcoming, a simple gesture, but one that reminded the woman that she was not alone, that someone cared. Once the immediate safety measures were in place, they sat down to talk again. The rancher wanted to understand more about her life, her fears, and her needs. The woman hesitated at first, but eventually began to open up. She spoke of her family, her dreams, and the life she had been forced to leave behind when danger found her. "You've been through so much," the rancher said quietly, listening carefully. "It takes a lot of courage to survive what you faced. Most people would have given up, but you kept going." Her eyes filled with tears and she looked down at her hands. "I didn't know what else to do," she admitted. "I felt trapped, but I knew I had to find a way out. I couldn't let fear control me completely." The rancher nodded, understanding the complexity of her emotions. "Fear is natural," he said. "It's how you respond to it that matters. And so far, you've done everything right." They spent the next few hours discussing practical steps. The rancher suggested contacting the local authorities, but he knew it had to be done carefully. Too much information could alert the person who had threatened her. They also discussed the possibility of involving trusted neighbors who could help if the threat came closer. As they talked, the woman began to feel a sense of empowerment. For the first time since her escape, she realized she had some control over her situation. She wasn't just running blindly anymore. She was part of a plan, and someone was guiding her safely through it. By late afternoon, the rancher decided they needed to test their security measures. They walked around the perimeter of the property, checking fences, gates, and possible hiding spots. Every detail mattered. Every shadow could be a potential risk. The woman followed closely, learning from the rancher's careful observations. She realized that survival wasn't just about running or hiding. It was about strategy, awareness, and trust. During the walk, the rancher also noticed signs that someone might have been near the property recently. Broken twigs, footprints, subtle disturbances in the grass. His jaw tightened as he considered the possibility. The danger was real, and it might not be over yet. They returned to the cabin as the sun began to set. The sky turned shades of purple and gold, but the sense of calm was fragile. The rancher made final adjustments to the cabin, ensuring they had clear lines of sight from windows, and that there were places to hide if necessary. He also prepared some supplies for the night, water, food, and a first aid kit, so they wouldn't have to leave the cabin once darkness fell. That evening they shared a simple dinner. It was quiet at first, both of them absorbed in their own thoughts. But gradually, the woman began to relax. She asked questions about the rancher's life, about how he had learned to handle situations like this, and about his routines. He answered carefully, revealing bits of his life without compromising security. "You've lived here a long time," she said finally, her voice soft. "It must be hard to trust people after everything you've seen." The rancher nodded. "It is. I've learned to rely on caution and experience. But sometimes you have to take a chance, even if it goes against everything you've been taught. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't the easiest thing." She looked at him, a mixture of admiration and wonder in her eyes. "I'm glad you took that chance," she said quietly. "I don't think I would have survived without you." The rancher said nothing, but inside he felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. He had broken from tradition, yes, but he had done what he knew was right. Protecting someone in need, even when it challenged his beliefs, had given him a new perspective. It was a lesson in courage, empathy, and the importance of following one's conscience. As the night settled in, they prepared for another long watch. The woman, now more alert and aware, understood that safety was temporary and vigilance was essential. The rancher remained calm, confident in his skills and his understanding of the land. Together they formed a small, unspoken partnership, a bond born of necessity, trust, and shared courage. And though the danger had not yet passed, both of them knew that they were stronger together than apart. For the first time in days, the woman allowed herself to hope. The rancher, too, felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that breaking tradition to help someone in need had been the right choice. The night stretched on, but the bond between them grew. They shared quiet conversations, practical plans, and small moments of understanding. Every shadow outside, every creak in the barn or cabin, reminded them to stay vigilant. Yet with each passing hour, their trust and confidence in each other deepened. By the end of the night, the woman was no longer just a frightened stranger. She had become a survivor, ready to face whatever came next with the rancher by her side. And the rancher, who had always relied on tradition and caution, had discovered a new form of courage, one that came from following his heart and doing what was right, even when it defied everything he had known. Together, they faced the uncertain future, knowing that the decisions made in these hours would shape everything that came after. And though challenges still lay ahead, the foundation of trust, strategy, and courage had been firmly set, preparing them both for the trials yet to come. The next morning, the ranch was bathed in a pale, soft light, the mist curling around the hills like ghostly fingers. The quiet beauty of the landscape belied the tension that hung over the cabin. The rancher had spent hours thinking through every detail of the day ahead. The woman had slept fitfully, her body and mind exhausted from fear, running, and uncertainty. But today would not be about rest. It would be about preparation, vigilance, and facing the reality that danger might still be close. After a quick breakfast, the rancher laid out a plan. "We need to stay alert today," he said, his voice calm but serious. "If anyone is looking for you, there's a chance they could be nearby. We'll need to be ready for anything." The woman nodded, her expression a mix of apprehension and determination. "I understand," she said softly. "I want to help in any way I can." They began by checking the perimeter of the cabin once more. The rancher pointed out potential blind spots, places where someone could hide, and areas that needed reinforcement. The woman watched carefully, learning from his experience. She realized that surviving this situation required more than courage. It required awareness, careful observation, and strategy. Once the cabin was secure, the rancher decided they needed to think about contingencies. "If someone tries to approach," he said, "we need a clear plan. We can't just react blindly. We'll use the terrain, the fences, and the natural cover to our advantage." Together, they walked the surrounding area, noting every possible approach and escape route. The rancher taught her how to listen for unusual sounds, how to recognize footprints and disturbances in the grass, and how to remain calm even when fear tried to take over. For the woman, this was new and frightening, but also empowering. She began to understand that fear didn't have to paralyze her. It could sharpen her senses and give her focus. By midday, they had created a small system of signals and precautions. The woman now felt a measure of control she hadn't experienced since the initial escape. She could watch, listen, and respond, and the rancher would guide her decisions. They worked in silence for stretches of time, the calm focus of their actions contrasting with the tension simmering beneath the surface. Around late afternoon, the rancher noticed something unusual. There were faint signs in the fields, broken branches, shallow footprints, subtle disturbances in the grass that suggested someone had passed nearby recently. His jaw tightened as he studied the patterns. The danger was real, and it might be closer than they had thought. He motioned for the woman to follow him into a safer position, further from the disturbed area. "Stay behind me," he instructed. "I don't know who or what this is yet, but we'll be ready." They observed silently, waiting and listening. The wind shifted slightly, carrying scents from the fields, and the rancher's trained eyes caught the slightest movement. For a moment, it was impossible to tell if it was the wind or something more. Every second stretched, tension coiling tighter with each passing moment. The woman felt her heartbeat quicken, and the rancher placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Stay calm," he whispered. "Panicking won't help. Watch, listen, and trust me." Time passed slowly, the suspense building. Then a shadow moved near the tree line, subtle but unmistakable. The rancher crouched slightly, signaling for the woman to remain still. They observed carefully, noting the shape and movement. Whatever it was, it hadn't spotted them yet. The rancher made a decision. "We can't wait any longer," he said quietly. "We need to act now, but smartly. Follow my lead and stay close." He guided the woman along a hidden path behind the cabin, a route he had used in the past to navigate the property unseen. Their movements were careful, calculated, and silent. The shadow continued moving, now slightly closer, and the tension in the woman's chest grew. But she remembered his instructions and stayed focused, following his every step. Once they reached a vantage point, the rancher paused to observe. He noticed that the figure in the distance was indeed someone who did not belong. The subtle posture, the cautious movement, and the way they scanned the area all indicated an intruder or someone searching for a specific person. The rancher's instincts told him this could be the person who had threatened the woman before. He whispered instructions to the woman. "Stay here, don't make a sound. If anything happens, follow me exactly, trust me." The next hour was a tense test of patience and strategy. The rancher watched the figure, noting every step, every subtle change in direction. The woman stayed perfectly still, her fear tempered by trust and the knowledge that the rancher knew what he was doing. They waited, watching for an opportunity to act without escalating danger. Finally, the intruder moved closer to the cabin's vicinity, unaware of their observation. The rancher made a careful decision. He would create a controlled distraction, enough to draw the person's attention away from the woman and toward him. "On my mark," he whispered. He set the plan in motion. A small sound, a dropped branch, caught the intruder's attention. The person moved cautiously toward the noise, trying to identify its source. The rancher seized the moment, signaling for the woman to move to a safer spot within the cabin, where she would remain hidden and secure. For the next tense minutes, the rancher maneuvered around the intruder, using his knowledge of the land and careful movements to ensure both his safety and the woman's. The intruder, confused and cautious, eventually moved away, unable to locate the source of the noise. The rancher waited until the figure disappeared from sight before allowing himself to relax slightly. He returned to the woman, who was still shaken but unharmed. "It's okay," he said gently. "They're gone, at least for now. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. Stay calm, breathe. The woman nodded, tears of relief streaming down her face. I can't believe you managed that, she whispered. I would have panicked completely. The rancher smiled faintly. You were brave, he said. You stayed calm and followed instructions. That's what helped. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about staying steady when fear tries to take over. They spent the rest of the afternoon reinforcing their security and preparing for the night. Every detail mattered. The placement of objects in the cabin, the routes to check outside, and the careful observation of any sounds or movements. The rancher knew that vigilance would be critical until the woman was fully safe. As evening approached, the rancher decided it was time to contact local authorities. He explained the situation cautiously, giving enough information to ensure protection but not revealing details that could alert the intruder. The woman remained nearby, watching and learning as the rancher handled the calls with calm authority. By nightfall, the rancher had taken every precaution. The woman was in a secure position, the cabin was fortified, and the property was under watchful attention. For the first time since the ordeal began, she felt a tentative sense of safety. The tension was still present, but it was tempered by the knowledge that someone experienced, capable, and compassionate was guiding her through the danger. As they sat together, the rancher reflected on the day's events. Breaking tradition had been difficult, but he now understood its value in a new way. Courage wasn't always about following rules or adhering to rigid codes. It was about recognizing what was right and acting decisively, even when it went against everything familiar. The woman, too, felt a shift within herself. She had been terrified, exhausted, and uncertain, but today had taught her the value of calm, careful action, and trust in someone who cared. She realized that survival was not only about running from danger, it was about strategy, preparation, and having someone to rely on. Night fell fully, blanketing the ranch in darkness. The stars shone brightly above, distant witnesses to the events unfolding below. The woman, now resting more easily, knew the night would be long, but she also felt a growing sense of hope. The rancher remained vigilant, aware that the intruder could return, but confident that their careful planning and shared courage had created a foundation for safety. For both of them, the day had been a test of courage, trust, and resilience. They had faced fear head-on, used strategy and awareness to protect themselves, and grown stronger through the experience. The bond between them had deepened, built on shared struggle and mutual respect, and it would guide them through whatever challenges remained. And though the threat had not entirely disappeared, the rancher and the woman had proven to themselves, and to each other, that they could face danger with courage, patience, and careful thought. The night ahead would be another test, but now they were not alone. Together, they had created a measure of security, resilience, and hope that would carry them through the hours to come. The ranch lay quiet in the early morning, a thin mist hovering over the fields and hills. The events of the past days had left the woman exhausted, but now, for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. The intruder had been kept at bay, thanks to the rancher's careful planning and unwavering vigilance. Yet, both of them knew the situation was not entirely over. They had survived the immediate danger, but the real challenge now was ensuring long-term safety and closure. After a quick breakfast, the rancher went over the plan for the day. He had contacted local authorities the previous night, and they had agreed to send a team to investigate and provide protection. Today, he would escort the woman to a safe place where she could finally rest without fear of further pursuit. "Are you ready?" he asked, looking at her with calm reassurance. The woman nodded, her eyes reflecting a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Yes," she said softly, "I'm ready." Before leaving, the rancher did one last check of the cabin. Everything was in order, doors secured, windows reinforced, and supplies ready. It was a routine he had perfected over the years, but today it felt different. Today, every action carried the weight of ensuring her freedom, not just the safety of his land. They stepped out into the morning light, the air crisp and fresh. The rancher led her along a narrow path through the fields, his eyes scanning for any sign of danger. The woman followed closely, her trust in him absolute. They moved silently, every step measured and deliberate, aware that even small missteps could draw attention. As they approached the edge of the property, a vehicle appeared in the distance. It was the authorities, coming to escort the woman to a secure location. Relief washed over her, a feeling she had not experienced in days. She realized that finally, the nightmare that had begun with fear and uncertainty was nearing its end. The rancher stopped and turned to her. "Stay close," he instructed. "We're almost there, but stay alert until you're fully safe." The authorities arrived, and after a brief explanation, they took the woman into their care. She turned back to the rancher, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you." The rancher shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "You were brave," he said. "I just helped guide you. You did all the hard work by surviving and staying strong." As the vehicle drove away, the rancher stood silently, watching the mist rise from the fields. The experience had changed him. Breaking tradition had not been easy, but he realized that sometimes the right choice required courage that went beyond rules. He had learned that compassion, empathy, and quick thinking could save lives, and that trusting one's instincts, sometimes against conventional wisdom, was a form of bravery in itself. Back at the cabin, the rancher reflected on the events of the past days. He thought about the woman's resilience, her ability to remain calm in fear, and the bond they had formed through shared struggle. He realized that helping someone in need had not only protected her, but it also reminded him of the deeper values he wanted to live by: courage, compassion, and integrity. For the woman, the journey ahead was still uncertain, but she had been given a chance at safety, a chance to rebuild her life. She had learned the importance of trust, vigilance, and self-reliance. Most importantly, she had experienced the kindness and bravery of someone willing to break with tradition to do what was right. In the weeks that followed, the authorities ensured that the woman remained safe, and the rancher returned to his daily routines on the ranch. Yet the experience left a lasting mark on him. He continued to follow tradition, but with a new understanding. Rules were important, but they were never more important than protecting life and doing the right thing. Sometimes courage meant acting decisively, even when it challenged everything you had been taught. Sometimes it meant stepping forward when others would step back. And sometimes it meant offering safety and trust to someone who had nowhere else to turn. The woman eventually began to rebuild her life, carrying with her the lessons learned from those tense days on the ranch. She knew she had been given more than physical protection. She had been given hope, guidance, and the experience of human kindness at its most profound. The rancher, too, carried the memory with him. Each time he walked through the fields or checked the fences, he remembered the small, desperate plea for help. "Please, I beg you, untie me." It had been a simple request, but it had set in motion a series of events that tested courage, trust, and the strength of the human spirit. In the end, both of them had been transformed by the experience. She had survived, strengthened by her own resilience and the protection she received. He had grown, learning that breaking tradition was not a weakness, but a necessary act of moral courage. And though the quiet ranch returned to its peaceful rhythm, the lessons of those days lingered, a reminder that bravery, compassion, and trust could change lives, sometimes in ways that tradition alone could never predict.